Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Machine Translation Hacks for Game Localization, Lessons from the Pro. My name is Carolina Pinto. I'm Marketing Coordinator at SYSTRAN. Today, we present the second of a three-part series focused on gaming and the importance of localization. During the next 30 minutes, we'll show you efficient translation processes. The first webinar was focused on how to resolve challenges of game localization, and in tomorrow's email, we'll send you part 1 and part 2 of that recording. The last session will cover return on investment. Be part of the conversation. All of your questions may be typed at any moment in the chat window area, and we'll address them at the very end during the open discussion. For those of you joining in, welcome. XTM is an enterprise-level translation management system that allows all of the content to reside in one location to permit maximum reuse and consistency. And SYSTRAN is a pioneer in machine translation since 1968. We have joined forces in integrating our solutions, and together we create a comprehensive translation ecosystem. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. John Weisgerber, he's a Senior Solutions at XTM, and Philip Dagger, he's a Technical Account Manager at SYSTRAN. Thank you.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you, Carolina, for that intro. My name is John Weisgerber, Senior Solutions Architect at XTM, and without further ado, I just want to say I'm excited to be here with Carolina and Philip to show you the power you can derive from XTM Cloud as an enterprise TMS, and SYSTRAN with their powerful customizable NMT to really supercharge your translation processes.
Great. Great to be here. Thanks, John. This is Philip, Technical Account Manager at SYSTRAN. Indeed, there's a lot of excitement about what's been going on with machine translation and combining it with tools that are more on the human translation side. Great integration capabilities and a lot more to come with XTM and SYSTRAN together. So one thing I wanted to do is just a quick recap on where did we what did we see last time. Can you go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
And you know, we've seen there are a lot of things that are needed to bring localization to a game. It's not just the software. It's not just a game. You have the customers to support. You have perhaps wiki pages. You have all sorts of support pages, fan art with some supporting material, storylines. You know, sometimes a book gets written before or after the game. There's live chat. There is a great number of different things that you want to bring to your audience in a number of different ways. Material that's audio, perhaps in videos, soundtracks, a lot of material of different types, some of it marketing, some of it with the strings in the software, some of it material that's perhaps going to posters during a trade show. There's a lot more to it than just developing your game. And so let's go to the next slide and have a look at some of these things that we are looking at when we need to localize a game. But one of the things that we want to understand really is there's more than just a text. We're looking at translating text, but there's a lot more to it. We'll talk about handling tags. Some of them are for formatting the text. Some of them are actually more sophisticated inline codes with variables. Another thing that we see that we will show here today is configuration and using it, both the SYSTRAN and XTM together. So we'll have a look at some of these, how to interact, how to use the two together. And then we'll go out into a slightly different direction, which is speech translation, or particularly transcription. There are quite a number of scenarios where you are dealing with audio files, MP3, WAV files, and we'll take a look at that. Terminology management, perhaps to round it up, there is a lot of time the need to specialize it. right? You have words that could be translated one way, but they shouldn't be translated, or they should be translated differently. There may be things that that are misspelled. Okay, that happens, or that are mistranscribed. The transcription can still be producing some incorrect spellings on the words. So terminology management can be very useful to fix some of those things, so that you don't waste a lot of time in fixing it again and again. And then we'll go into closing remarks. Let's move on to the next slide. And so let's start talking about formatting tags and inline codes. What's that all about? You know, at the very entry level, formatting tags, we've all seen them. There are strings of text, and embedded into them, there are extra pieces of information, such as around the sheriff here, we see the B for bold. The sheriff shot 3 times and one of the bullets hit your car's engine, something like that. That could be typically in a race car type of game. And you see some tags there, and these tags are there because they help indicate the style, the format at which how we want to see the text presented, right? So it's a formatting tag. The sheriff may be bold-faced, the number 1 may be italicized. These are simple cases. There are many others that we've seen. Anytime you look at HTML pages or code, you'll see underscores, superscripts, subscripts, strike-throughs, and so on. So these are common tags. And the first lesson really is that translation is not as simple as just translating the words of a sentence. There is much more to it. It gets complicated. There is more than just the text. There's also other things in there, in that segment or in those sentences in between. There are tags for formatting. Now, going beyond that, beyond the basics of formatting tags, there are some scenarios that we are seeing which are game engine specific tags, right? So, I mean, we've seen HTML tags, we've seen XML, we've seen a variety of different types of tags that we are somewhat prepared for. And then we're looking at the game engine, and they may have their own thing. And they may have, for instance, something simple to say, there is a sentence that's, you know, the word green needs to actually appear in green on screen. And then something red may need to appear in red. And so there may be a game engine that has been developed with certain tags to recognize what color, what appearance to give it. It might be a more descriptive or symbolic appearance, such as bloody, right? So you may want to have something, and it may not be with the less than greater than sign. It might be with pound signs. It may vary from one game engine to another, one developer to another. And so one of the things that's going to help is that if we can specialize the translation engine to actually be prepared for that. Right, so we're doing pretty good on this. Let's go to the next slide and see where else this is going. So, you know, one of the things that we're also seeing is that it's not enough to translate those sentences with some of these tags or all of them, but also actually there will be variables, right? So there will be, quite often we see the need to translate something that is a symbolic placeholder, a variable or a placeholder for something. For instance, in the upper left corner there, you see %s uses %s in %s, and that can be many different things. So essentially, we have a subject using some sort of a weapon, and it's in some sort of a mood, and that could be in desperation, in anger, in love. It could be a variety of different things, even part phrases like in a desperate counterattack or something like that. That is something that we see in some game engines because it helps save time for the developer to be prepared to process a variety of different actions and events in the game. But then also, you know, the challenge comes there to make sure that we don't break those tags, like a %s. You don't want to break that into something different. And that does happen. I mean, these are some of the real challenges we see in some of the translation engines out there. That sometimes the %s will get split into there's a space in between, or it loses a space before or after another word got translated. So, for instance, translating it to German, something uses something, and now we have some information that is no longer usable for the translated version. Here, the last one in the lower right corner, we see USA. That's actually USA, for Spanish for uses. And there's a lot of little challenges like these that can make it really difficult. So we've made quite a bit of progress on all this.
Yeah, this one, this slide is from XTM. So Philip has laid out the challenge of dealing with inline tags, variables, placeholders, all of which are very common, particularly in software strings, such as your gaming strings, and formatting tags of various kinds and any other content. He also mentioned how the great work SYSTRAN is doing in training MT engines to recognize those for what they are, because most MT engines do struggle with that. But one of the benefits and one of the ways that you can utilize XTM and SYSTRAN together is that XTM as a translation management system and as your translation tool, we have, file filters, customizable file filters like most translation technologies do. So you can, any of your inline tags, any of your software variables and placeholders that might exist within your strings can be customized inside of XTM. You can see them here kind of in this screenshot, the little colorful 1s and 2s and curly brackets. They represent different types of formatting tags, like the green ones around the word chess, or blue tags like inline variables and things. So XTM's file filters all automatically support things like HTML tags, which are standard. That's a standard set of tags that we encounter. And we also layer those file filters, so you can have Excel files with HTML tags in it, or JSON files that also, where the strings contain HTML tags, and we can recognize those automatically. You can also set up custom variables using regex rules for any of those types of examples that Philip gave, where your strings have specialized inlines of some sort in them. One of the things to note that when these things exist, they're protected like this, as you see in the screenshot from our translation workbench, meaning that your linguists will not break them or think that, if it's a word-based variable that gives the translator some context about what it means, they're not going to translate the text inside of it because it's protected. What they can see, as you can see in this screen, is they can always see the nature of the inline tag or variable, because XTM preserves that and displays that to the linguist. So they can move them around, as they often need to change position in the target language. They can see what they mean if there's any useful context information there, but they're protected from editing. And the other benefit is, because this content is effectively pre-processed by XTM in this case, then XTM has a built-in SYSTRAN integration, as we're going to show you in the next section. So XTM can consume the SYSTRAN MT, which I get my pointer going here. You might be able to see down here. This is a machine translation from SYSTRAN that's automatically been brought into the workbench through this integration to help you enhance your productivity in the tool. So the great news here is that as part of this integration, XTM is sending pre-processed data to SYSTRAN, which makes the training of the MT engine easier, because it's always going to receive inlines in a consistent fashion because they've been pre-processed by XTM, instead of many different formats, each of which the MT is going to have to learn separately.
Good, yes. So this is indeed an important aspect of where machine translation is going, because there is a need to properly handle and process much more than just plain sentences of good old English. You have promotional events where there are tags, perhaps controlling what the point level is, or what level you have reached, and or information as we see. Let's go and slide through this a few more. When you have promotions like these that typically use quite a bit of tags, whether they're formatting or inline codes, as we can see in the next slide, these were some examples that let's go through the whole. There's a couple of clicks there to go for line. Yeah. So some of the challenges on these is that we have some information that contains text to be translated, but also a lot of things that should not be modified, should not be translated, should not be separated with extra spaces. And so here is another popular engine. Let's go to the next slide and see what our generic engine does. So with this generic SYSTRAN engine that's already trained on a lot of material, but not specific to a specific game engine. There's already much better handling of these tags, but there may still be the occasional mishap. And so really the benefit of going beyond the generic product is to have an engine specialized, totally aware of what's coming, what sort of tags are possible, how should they be handled, because we feed that into the training process. So we can see the next slide has the result of the same text going through a specialized translation engine. So that's something that at SYSTRAN we put a lot of emphasis on, is to not work with just one generic engine. You may quite typically have multiple engines for different projects, even different games may have different ways of handling different tags and so on. And so that's something that we can accommodate very nicely. So another point we wanted to make is to how to configure this. I think John will give us some insights into that.
Yes. So the configuration in XTM is quite simple. XTM comes with built-in integrations or connectors, as you can see, to 14 different machine translation providers, of which SYSTRAN is one of the primary ones. And it's simply a matter of activating the MT system as an XTM administrator. You turn it on using this checkbox here, and then you can see down here where you input the API information. In SYSTRAN's case, there's a URL for where your server is located, and there's an API key. And then you click this synchronize button, and it establishes the connection between XTM and the machine translation system. And once that's active, then you can see in this screenshot over here, perhaps, where you can select the profiles. These are the customized engine profiles within the SYSTRAN Neural MT. For every target language you're working on, you can choose one of your customized profiles in order to get the most out of it. So that you get the benefits of all those specialized examples, for example, that Philip just gave about the inlines. Once it gets trained on what your standard variables look like, you want to make sure you leverage that profile in your projects within XTM. All right. You can also customize all the behaviors here in XTM, and you get a glimpse of them here, but I have another slide on this, and let me see what I've done. So this is a close-up of kind of the settings we were looking at. There's 3 basic settings once you've selected to utilize an MT system in your translation project in XTM. The combination of these 3 settings give you a great deal of flexibility in what your behaviors for utilizing MT will look like. Without going into too much detail about XTM Cloud today, some of you may already be XTM users, you can set what the global system defaults are. That's what we saw on the previous screen. And then for every kind of area you develop within your system, because XTM is a true enterprise TMS, so everybody within your organization can all be working in the same system and leveraging terminology and TM data, but you can create these repositories, if you will, for your marketing team, for your product team, for your user support and help team, whatever. They can each have their own areas, and therefore for every content type and for every process you can develop what the default machine translation behaviors are for each of those groups and processes based on these 3 settings. The first one here is with all these little checkboxes. This is your translation memory threshold, right? What this is saying is if I have high-level TM matches, all the way from perfect in context exact matches through 100% TM matches, and you can decide how low you want to go on the fuzzies. As the MT continues to improve, you're going to start unchecking some of these boxes. But what this says is if I have high-level translation memory matches, then I don't want to send those out for machine translation, because it's not going to be better than my already translated, validated things that are stored in my translation memory. Right? It also, as the point is it reduces the volume of your MT. Technically, I forget how SYSTRAN does this, but if you're paying, by the word for throughput in an MT system, you can reduce the number of words you send. That's what a lot of people do with repetitions. I have them unchecked here so that they get machine translated. But you can also you can reduce the throughput if you have highly repetitive content for machine translation, if you're paying for that, by checking this box and allowing XTM to manage your repetitions for you in the way it normally does in the workbench.
Yeah, that's a good point, John. Really, the ability to control whether you're going through it again and again, or whether you're not going to want to pay for it. And there are, of course, several options there as to how you host it and whether you have to pay for it again. So good point.
Great, thank you. This setting it's called populate the target with a match. And what this means, and I'll show you this in just momentarily, is should XTM automatically copy the machine translation result into the workbench in the target portion of the segment. That's good for machine translation post-editing workflows and things like that, but you may not always wish that to be the case. This last one is called set MT matches to done. So XTM will track machine translation usage just like any other TM match type. You'll see it in your metrics where you find your TM leveraging report. You can also see how many MT segments were used when there was no better TM match available. But this has to do with setting those segments automatically to complete or done. And that's mostly used for raw MT processes. So what I do is I have just a couple of examples here. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the tool itself, but I want to try to show you this. I don't think I can type with this nice highlighter thing. I want to show you a quick example of what I'm talking about because I did this demonstration actually at the AMTA conference in Boston about 1.5 years ago. So again, you can customize your machine translation settings at multiple levels. At the system level, what we call customers, those are the repositories that I referred to. At the project level, but most importantly in project templates, this is what allows you to automate. You set a definition for whatever your standard translation processes are. You set them in project templates, and you can see these 3 here that I created using different MT settings, right? On the one hand, I have kind of a formal MT plus post-editing process. So what's stored in this template and will be set automatically when I create a project using this template. Scroll down here and you'll see these familiar MT settings. I've got my SYSTRAN turned on. My profiles are all selected per language. So I set my TM threshold, whatever it may be. If the MT is proving to be very good and they're getting quite good, then you can kind of start hiving off some of these fuzzy matches. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold today. And then what I did, because this is a formal MT post-editing process, I'm going to have XTM go ahead and always put the machine translation result into the target portion of the segment. That saves the linguist a fraction of a second every time they have to select it and say, okay, go ahead and give me the MT when there's no TM match, right? It's already there, but notice that I do not set the matches to done. So they're incomplete, meaning they're still within the scope of the work for the linguist. So they will edit them. That's their job as a post editor, right? By comparison, this is a raw MT setup. And so what you'll see, this is when I don't even want a human to look at this. I'm just pushing it through XTM to get it translated for gisting or for whatever kind of user-generated content you might want to translate. Again, I've got my MT set up. I don't want to see any fuzzy matches in this case. I'm just going to rely on the MT whenever I don't have a really good TM match. Notice I'm always inserting the target again, and I'm going to go ahead and set them to done. Meaning I'm going to set those segments to complete after the MT is inserted. There's some additional settings in XTM like this one. They work in combination. It says when XTM detects a step in the workflow and all of the segments are set to green, it's going to automatically finish that step. And that's what enables the raw MT. So you're going to submit a file, you use this project template, it'll put in any kind of high level TM matches it has. For everything else, it's just going to machine translate it, automatically insert the machine translation and mark all those segments as complete. And then XTM will finish that workflow step and your target file is ready to go. It can flow back automatically through your system integration. The other end of the spectrum is kind of your standard human translation process, just supported and backed up by machine translation. If there's no good TM match for a given segment, why not go ahead and offer MT to the linguist just in case it helps, right? You're not forcing it on anybody. So again, I've got my TM threshold set. I'm going to go ahead and show some of my fuzzy matches in this case. I'm not going to automatically populate the target with the match at all, right? I'm not trying to foist MT on the linguist in this case for this type of content. Perhaps it's marketing, needs a high level of human prose and creativity, but maybe it helps them be a little more productive. Because what will happen in this case is if I don't automatically copy it into the segment, it'll just be displayed to the linguist like any other fuzzy match would be as a suggestion in the cat tool. And of course, I'm not going to make these done. So really quickly what that looks like to show you guys in my project list. This is, I've got a couple of projects here. I created one with each of those templates I just showed you. I think I got some Spanish in there. This is a really, really short file because we're trying to keep this pretty quick. So what you can see here is this is my MT post editing workflow. And I've got a couple of ice matches here. There's only 3 segments in this file. So these were automatically pre-translated from the TM. But this segment number 2 in the middle, you can see it came from machine translation. You can see it says SYSTRAN MT down here. That's where this translation came from. So what I did is this is what it means to populate the target into this segment from the machine translation. So it's already recorded as an MT match. The result of the MT is already pasted here, so the linguist doesn't have to come down here and select it. They can just edit this and move on, right? By contrast, this is the human translation supported by MT. I want to open the editor, forgot that part. We're just doing Spanish. And you'll see the difference between that and the one we just saw. All governed by the behaviors that I defined in my project settings. Again, I've got the same 2 ice matches here, automatically pre-translated, and these are in fact locked for editing and set to complete because they're done and they're validated. Here I've got another segment. Notice what's here, what you see here is a copy of the source text because I've got my SYSTRAN MT here, but it's just a suggestion. There's no TM match for this segment. So the linguist has the option to accept this machine translation. If they wish, they can just come here and select it. XTM copies it in there and then they can edit it, right? So Beautiful. It doesn't get in anybody's way. And one more quickly. The raw MT process is fully automatic. This will only take a second, nothing to see. What you'll notice, those of you who are familiar with XTM, when I switch to the workflow screen here, you'll see that these workflow steps are all grayed out, meaning they are complete. I didn't do anything. The whole thing got MT'd and set to complete, and then it was automatically finished because I just wanted to turn that around in a MT process, right? So we can already see here in the raw MT round trip project that its status is finished because that was completely automatic. That's what those settings do. You can use them in all kinds of combinations to support whatever processes you need, and you can save them in project templates so that you can automate that process. Okay.
Beautiful, thanks. That was really good explanation. I had a couple of things I wasn't quite familiar with on the XTM side, so that helped a lot. Yeah, it is definitely a big time saver. You can automate a whole lot of processes and projects with that. So let's take a look at the next step, speech transcription and the translation of it. So one of the things that we can do in the SYSTRAN enterprise servers is the translation of text, of course, and the file translations of different formats, but also what we call speech translation if you have configured it with a transcription engine. This is an option. You can go with Vocapia or with Nuance for voice for speech transcription, and these typically would be you working with WAV files. If you have something else like an MP3 or an M4A, you may need to convert it depending on which transcription engine you use, or you may be able to use it as is. If you have an audio track inside a video, what you might typically see is that you need to extract that WAV file first. And then what we do with this is we transcribe it and then also translate it at the same time. Now, sometimes you want the translation right away. Sometimes you really only care about the transcription. This is something that can give you both. So we have here a little video. If we hover with the cursor over to the video on the left side, you can see a little play button. Yep. So this is a kind of a common scenario. You may have a, I'm not sure if we're going to hear it, but essentially there's a narration there with some voice giving you sort of the storyline. But there's also a lot of noise. There's lots of fighting and shooting and cussing and other voices and other fighters and so on in a battle scene, all sorts of engines and lightning and thunder and that sort of things. So it's not always a trivial thing. It's not always the easiest thing to try to transcribe that. But the scenario will present itself where you have perhaps somebody has created this audio and now you want maybe a marketing department or maybe a reseller or a distributor wants to create a Chinese version of it, or an Indonesian or a French or a Spanish version. And they may not be able to get to a very clean audio track of just the narration. One of the things you may need to do is to, or even just the script of it, right? So it has to be transcribed back into a script. And so when you submit such a file, in this case, a WAV file, what you will see is that it will go through several stages, all as part of that same upload. You upload the file, it goes into transcribing it, and then translating, and eventually you have the translated copy of the result. So one of the first things you'll do with that is you download it. And what you download in this simplest case is you simply download the translated version of what the transcription produced. And of course, at this point, there is perhaps a choice to be made, right? Do you want that transcription to be processed, enhanced, reviewed, improved, and then translated at that point? You can do that directly inside of the post editor in SYSTRAN. Or a very common scenario too is if you're familiar with the XTM tools, and especially the ability to add some segmentation to, let's say you have a chapter that the transcription gave you as a single segment and you want to break it up into multiple individual sentences. And for a number of other reasons, you may prefer to use the option 2, which is to use the XTM for the post editing of the source. So you need to get to that source. You need to get to that transcribed, the transcription result.
Right. And so as Philip explained, this is really exciting stuff because you can get your audio automatically transcribed. And what we're trying to explain right now is you kind of have choices. It depends on what workflow will work best for you. Philip's going to show you the transcription editor in SYSTRAN momentarily. I wanted to briefly show you what we describe here in option 2, which is what we call a pre-processing workflow in XTM. So you can take your unedited transcript out of SYSTRAN, and we hope as we continue our technology partnership to automate this process at some point in the future. And you can put it into XTM as the source file for a project. And what you do is you use our pre-processing workflow step to edit the source text. Now the benefits of that are that first of all, you can manage this whole process in one project, and it's a little hard to visualize, so I'm going to try to show you that very briefly here. But the benefits are you bring this source file into XTM as a source file, and effectively what you're doing is you're doing an initial translation step from one language to the same language. Let's assume that's English US, common example. Then you're going to do what we would consider a translation step from English to English. Thereby you're effectively editing the English text. But the benefits of that are, first of all, you have full benefit to all of the spell checkers, your integrated terminology management, and QA checks into the workbench, but you're also creating translation memory. You're creating English to English translation memory of segments that you have modified while you are editing these segments. That means the next time this comes around, if you get an automatic output, an automatic transcription of a different audio file that contains some similar content, you may end up with the same segments. And thereby XTM will remember those and pull it from the translation memory. And so it can accelerate your transcription editing. And so what happens with the pre-processing workflow step is once that step is complete, then the output of that translation step automatically becomes the source text for what we call the main translation workflow into multiple languages.
Right.
The same thing can be done for what we call pivot language projects, where you translate from one language into another and then into several others. Let me give you just a brief example of what it looks like. I've created this project in XTM, and it has all those settings preset in terms of the workflow. Basically what it looks like is I haven't done anything in this project yet, so what we see is it's called the pre-processing English workflow step. And all I see right now is just one step in my workflow. When I open it up, it's English to English, right? Because this is my pre-processing step. So effectively, I can make changes in here, and I'm effectively editing the English, right? I change just a couple of these segments. Doesn't really matter. I don't even have to spell that right, because why waste time on that today? Don't introduce errors, right? That's the key. So I mark all these as finished. All the ones that don't require editing, I'm good to go. Should have chose a shorter file. The point is this. So I've effectively edited this English. Again, you have all your integrated terminology here from XTM. That's another section in our webinar. We'll get to that. But so you can leverage that when you're editing your English to make sure it's correct, because the automatic transcription may not have selected the proper terminology. You are building translation memory as you save these segments, right? So when I click this arrow, this is simulating completing this pre-processing workflow step. And what you'll see happen is the result of that, the target file, if you will, of that English to English becomes the source text for the main translation workflow. So now it has to reanalyze this content against the rest of the content, which I'm translating into Korean, Russian, and Spanish, which you can see here, right? So these settings here represent my pre-processing step. I did English to English, and now I have my main translation workflow. I can actually see them side by side here. So I can see that the pre-processing step, again, this is grayed out, it's complete. And here I can see my Korean, my Russian, and my Spanish is ready to go. And the source language of these is the result of the pre-processing step, right? So you'll see the demos and the nonsense that I stuck in here, even where I misspelled it, right? So that's kind of just to quickly visualize, that's what that looks like. Then as a project manager, it's nice because you can manage this entire process within one translation project, one integrated project, without having to do them in separate processes or offline outside of the TMS. For super advanced stuff, and some of our gaming clients that do this, you can actually have continuous translation processes, and if this English changes, you can go back and modify this and keep repeating this cycle. Anyway, that's exciting stuff. That's the option you have from XTM. But now Philip's going to show you what it looks like in SYSTRAN.
Excellent. Yes. So that's a really strong point about this cooperation and integration of both sides here, because one of the things you can do is, of course, just use the translation that came from the MT and perhaps work from that, or you can go to the editor, as we see here, and you'll see the ability to scrub through that audio track that was submitted, and you'll see each of the sentences that were detected. Also, perhaps what gender it was, or speaker number, identification, that sort of things. But most importantly, the ability to then intervene and make changes to that transcription that you see on the left column. Right, on the lower left side, you see the source. That's really the output of the transcription.
We have a couple of quick questions here. Should we address them right now, Philip?
Yes, why not?
Yes, one of which is, can you use the automatic transcription feature without the MT part? I think we kind of addressed that. Yes.
It is embedded into it when you configure it into the SYSTRAN server.
Right.
So in that sense, you use it by asking to translate it, but the output is not necessarily something you're going to have to use. You can certainly just grab the.
So you can access that.
You can access it, and in fact, the next 2 slides will show how to do that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. The other question, really quickly, was: does the transcription feature work for projects where the source is not in English?
Well, yes, the transcription engines that we combine here, either from Vocapia or from Nuance, they do support many different languages. They don't support all exactly the same languages, but you can definitely do transcription from, let's say, if you have content in French and you want to transcribe it and then have that translated to English or to Korean or something like that. Yes, absolutely.
Right. So the languages supported are going to vary by the transcription engine itself, which is integrated within SYSTRAN.
Yes, it also is, Vocapia has their development and they have some languages that they focus on based on their customers. So over time, you'll see probably a number of languages are common to both. And many of them overlap with what we offer, so we can actually integrate it and offer a transcription and translation of that, absolutely. But there will always be some languages that perhaps only one offers and the other one doesn't. So you'll want to go into details so when it's critical that you have exactly this language included or that language included.
All right, thank you.
So yeah, if we can go to the next slide, we'll see what we can do about post-editing this.
I think I did.
Oh yeah, okay. So essentially, you see the source the source display is the result from the transcription, but you can modify that too. You can post-edit that. And after you make changes to it, you can compare. Did I catch everything? You typically will be looking through or scrubbing through the soundtrack to listen to it and say, oh, there's something that I hear different, perhaps. And then at that point, of course, you'll want to retranslate that. And that's already there, ready for you to do. So the same engine, same profile, same, customization, whatever you put into that will retranslate your material that you have just post-edited. And at that point, you can also compare and see differences between the new translation and the original translation that was the result of just the raw transcription. And then that's what that would look like. So the next slide, what you'll see is, typically what you want to do is to have those sentences that are meaningful reused. You don't want to just have that document with the translation. In fact, you may not really care about that. You may not do that retranslation. Maybe you only care about post-editing the source here, the result of the transcription. Now it's time to get it down out of the system, out of the server, and you do that by downloading it as a TM. So when you download it as a TM, you select the segments you want, and you have a choice of formats. One of them is the TMX that you can then easily take into XTM. But even the Bitext, you can see perhaps simply as a plain text. Even though it is a tab-separated values file, you could use something like Notepad++ or some other tools to eliminate everything behind the tab, and you are left essentially with what's at the beginning of each segment, which is the transcription.
Yeah, this is just briefly, you'll see this again more later, but this is an important point that Philip is bringing up about the ability to pull your customizations out of SYSTRAN. So wherever it makes more sense to have your workflow go through SYSTRAN and you're customizing your MT results, you can sync that with XTM as your TMS by pulling that data in TMX form and putting it into XTM so that you can make use of it in all the other processes as well.
Exactly. Yeah, and so here's what that might look like on a simple text where you have a few sentences in which we removed everything past the tab. So we don't care about the translation necessarily. We only needed the editor to pre-process, if you will, the output of the transcription. And having exported it as a TM, we can then eliminate the target side and say, now this is what I want to work with, perhaps as a translation project inside XTM. And of course, some other reasons why you might want to use this combination is that at times you will see in the upper left corner an example where line number 6 is actually a fairly long set of lines, multiple sentences, right? A single segment, a paragraph, if you will, in which multiple sentences are there, both in their original English and in the translated Spanish form. And you may want to keep them both, but you may want to segment it. So there's tools in XTM to help you do that and get down to a sentence by sentence approach. And then obviously, you're not a game developer if you're not also a programmer. Everybody likes to code. It is very rare that you do only sort of games that are at the graphic level, interactive tools perhaps. You very often will want to integrate something. You will probably have developed your own tools, your own CAT tool even, or some other tools that surround the whole production environment. And one of the things that you'll want to do is perhaps integrate that transcription through an API. We do offer that as well.
Right. XTM also has an SDK that includes APIs. That's one of the reasons the tools work great together, and a lot of our gaming clients take advantage of that. One of the things that game companies typically have a surplus of is developers. So they usually take great advantage of the APIs available in both systems.
Great. Before we run out of time, let's do a quick last few words on glossaries, terms or term bases, do not translates, dictionaries, terminologies, and so on. So what do we use it for, right? I mean, many times there are ambiguities. It could be translated one way or another way. We want to keep it consistent. The engine is great, but occasionally it goes a little bit different way. You could have a weapon that's a blade, a bush knife, a dagger, or a sword, a Swiss Army knife, and many other things. It has a blade. You want to also correct misspellings. The spell checker may not detect them all. There are cases where it makes perfect sense to have it spelled this way. It's the right grammatical category, and yet it's not the way it should be. And then, for instance, you may have some things that are properly recognized and translated in a generic form, but not in all of the inflected forms. So sometimes what you need is really the ability to add terminology and have it recognized not just the way you entered it as is, but do actually much more and have a whole set of inflected versions of it as well, conjugated versions of the verb, plural version of a noun, gender-specific inflections of an adjective, that sort of things. There may also be different capitalization. A monster as an adjective. This is a monster game. Or it's the monster. Oh, it's the monster. It's spelled differently or capitalized differently. So there's a variety of reasons why you might want to override what the engine is doing. Let's have a look at that.
Yeah, so a moment on terminology management. Philip explained all the various reasons you need to control terms and phrases in your content. XTM, as a full all-in-one integrated TMS, has a very powerful terminology management module in it. So it enables you to centralize and store your approved terms in the system, and so that they're leveraged. I gave you a glimpse of that earlier. We'll see a little bit more later, but how the terms are integrated into the translation tool itself, so you can leverage them across all of your processes for consistency and accuracy, right? XTM supports the entire life cycle of terminology management, from automatic terminology extraction, which you can pull a set of candidate terms and phrases from the source files that you've put into a translation project. Helps you build your glossaries, and a lot of people like to use it for multilingual SEO, for example, for different types of translation purposes. You can also give your linguists access rights to help you insert the proper translations of these terms even while they're working on their projects. Being a cloud-based system, the management of your terminology can be collaborative online and, again, leveraged easily across the entire organization. I've mentioned that it's integrated seamlessly into the workbench. You've kind of seen that already. What I didn't demonstrate is that we have automatic QA checks for terminology built into the translation workbench itself, right? When we detect that there's a term from your glossary in the source text and you have an approved translation of that term in your glossary also, then we're going to look in the target language text and expect to see that term there, and if we don't, we'll give a QA warning to the linguist. That's part of how we enforce that those things are used consistently and accurately. You can also track rejected or deprecated translations, so we can also highlight those when they do use a term that they're not supposed to, right? Those are the automatic QA checks. And a key point that we keep coming back to is that so your terminology can be managed in XTM, but you can easily transport it into SYSTRAN's MT as a TBX, term-based exchange file format, to train your MT engine on your terms, right? That's going to save everybody time when your engine has learned your terminology and it starts outputting your translations with the proper terms in it from the start.
Excellent, and that's really a key point, is the ability to make changes to what we already have. All right, the engine was trained on millions of segments, millions of sentences with possibly the specialized content, and yet there may be cases where it learned from there to translate one way where you may want it differently. A golden dagger and a silver dagger should still be a dagger, but there's several ways to translate it, and that's because it learned that way from the samples from the training material. So a specialized engine will less likely do that, a generic engine more likely. You can still find the need, though, to say, no, I want it to be un poignard in French when I see a dagger. And so you can do this case by case. You can import files. Here's an example where we put the dagger in and poignard, and then we immediately see the system has analyzed it and provides also the inflected forms. It's able to recognize inflected forms at the source as well, and will use those to match the terms during translation. So the result of that is that you now have translations that will use the words the way you wanted it for the golden dagger, the silver dagger, but also for other kinds, the multiple daggers, the fully capitalized daggers, and then daggers that are perhaps part of a hyphenated compound word, and a few other examples, imagine. So the net benefit is really that you can customize it. We can specialize the engine for you, but we can also let you further customize it. Right? You can either choose a generic engine that we see in the upper left corner, and sometimes something like Artform games may not be translated the way we want it. In this case, we don't want it translated, it's the company name. And it is not misspelled with 2 A's. This is actually how it's supposed to be. So you can override it so that even a misspelled version will still properly translate. You can do things that go beyond the spell checker. You can do things that go beyond some of the other built-in capabilities, and you can overwrite quite a number of things. It's highly customizable. And this is what it looks like when you put it all together through XTM. You select your profile, you select which one of the profiles has your glossaries or your terms enabled. And if you didn't, at the bottom, you'll see what the translations would have been for MT output. If you do have that terminology added, you'll see the proper result in your translations. And as John indicated, it is definitely straightforward to take a file that has a number of your glossary terms already in there, like a TBX file or something like a tab-separated text file. There's a couple of other formats we support, and you can take that into the system. You see on the right side one of the screenshots that represent the configuration of the settings, what file formats we support, including for dictionaries, which is where your glossaries or term bases would come in. So it's one thing to do that. It's another thing to have a quick check to actually see it's working. And what you see in our text editor, the text translator, we can color code. We can show in highlight blue, for instance, what terms were matched during translation. So that's a quick way to check that you have that. We can also do that with translation memories if you have loaded translation memories into the system. You usually don't do that if you have translation memories because you use them in XTM. Right? That's really the first level where you will have your translation memories. But there may be cases where you don't need to go through an external CAT tool. You may have an integration with a real-time chat program. You may have a few other things that go straight to the engine, and you want the TM match there as well. Definitely doable.
Okay, so these last couple of slides are an attempt to kind of illustrate how this all comes together. the integration of XTM as the TMS, the hub for content, with a direct real-time integration through to your trained SYSTRAN MT engines and pulling that content in. Just to give you a sense of what you're looking at, the other challenges that typically revolve around translating gaming content is that it's creative and original, and a lot of your linguists have no idea what it means when you send it to them the first time. So you want to push additional instructions and contextual information to the linguist. What we're looking at here is a sample source file. It's an Excel file in structured form, as you can see. And it contains various metadata about the strings in addition to the translatable content, which we see here in English. I'm sure this is very small for you, but don't worry about it. The first column represents the string ID, or the unique identifier for that string. This is the metadata that XTM can use to give you perfect in-context exact matches for your software strings when they appear in different sequences. We store this in the translation memory, so you can also search and find them. These columns here, which you probably can't read, are metadata or contextual information for the linguist about the translation. So the character's name, the gender, male or female, the mood that they're in, right? This is the kind of information that's going to enable the translator to do their job correctly. XTM is we can create what we call analysis templates in XTM. So when you give us clearly structured information like this, we can develop rules that know how to parse this format and put this data where it goes, right? Instead of treating all of this as translatable text, we're going to import this as the string ID. We're going to display this metadata, context metadata, to the linguist, but not as translatable text. It's just there for their reference. Other things we can do is import character length limits when you have precious real estate in your screen, especially in mobile apps. If one of these columns contained the character length limit for a given string, we can import that into the translation workbench, and XTM can warn the linguist if they exceed that length. This file also happens to be multilingual, which you can see in this part down here. This is another feature of our analysis templates in XTM, is you can have a column for every target language in the same file. And this analysis template will parse that structure when it comes in. Within XTM, it'll look like any other translation project from English into multiple languages, but when you download the result, the target file, you're going to get one Excel file, and XTM will have placed the appropriate target in each column in the same file, which is pretty convenient. Usually people spend a lot of time copying and pasting text. And this is kind of how it all comes together in XTM Workbench. There's a lot going on here, but if we look at this one here, this is where the segment ID goes that comes from the first column of that file. We display it to the linguist. Sometimes that alone gives them some useful information. It's also the basis for ICE matching on those segments. The other thing you can do here is you can actually put screenshots or images into the project itself. And we link those to the segments via these string IDs so that the linguist can see additional context about what they're translating, right? And here you see all those metadata columns I talked about. This is gender, mood, character name, additional information that helps the translator translate this source text, which is over here, into the proper, using the proper phrasing, terminology, etc. Again, you can see the integrated glossary terms here in the workbench. We've already covered that part, right? And we actually had a question here about continuous translation workflows. So let me address that just briefly because I mentioned it here. XTM enables you to have, instead of creating a brand new translation project every time you have an iteration of your text for a given game title, for example, you can just have one translation project in XTM and call it the name of that game title, and then you continuously update that project. Really what you're doing is you're adding files into the project that have the same file name as the previous one did. And so XTM overwrites the source file with the new version and automatically transfers over any data that you've already done and relies on the TM for anything that's new or modified. And you can continuously repeat that process via you can do it in the user interface or manually, or also via the API, via an integration. But you can see down here where the MT has come in. in addition to my TM matches. This is from an MT translation from SYSTRAN. So as that engine gets trained, it's going to boost your productivity, right? You're going to turn around things faster. You're going to spend less on translation because your MT is going to really boost your productivity. And this slide is just kind of an overview. You'll notice this is a repeat of the graphic that from the first one. What we have here is XTM and SYSTRAN and kind of how it works together, just to help you visualize this, right? These yellow lines represent integrations between all of your different content types into your enterprise translation management system, which is XTM, right? So all kinds of content can be going through XTM for translation, with or without machine translation, but building your translation memory data and your shared terminology data throughout the whole organization. With SYSTRAN, you'll still have this green stuff here. Actually, I put this here to represent the real-time integration between XTM and SYSTRAN, right? So any of your processes that you want to leverage machine translation as a part of, you've got that built in, and it happens in real time and continues training your system. But also, these red lines represent various workflows where it's going to make sense to just use raw MT, perhaps. Not all of your processes may go through XTM. We talked about sometimes that it may make more sense to edit your transcriptions in SYSTRAN and various things like that. Or you've got your user-generated content or live chat things, support content, your knowledge base articles and things like that that you may want to use raw MT for. You can send that directly to SYSTRAN also, right? Through the APIs, etc. So both can be running in parallel. And this last part represents kind of what the point we've touched on a couple of times, where you can pull your terminology glossaries from XTM in TBX format and put it straight into SYSTRAN to improve those MT results. Any kind of customizations you do as part of these workflows in SYSTRAN, you can pull that data and push it back into XTM. Whenever you post edit that MT to improve it, you can put that into your TMs and your terminology in XTM to keep them in sync, and thereby enhance and support all of these different workflows. And I think that's
beautiful. Yeah, that's about it.
Those kind of were my closing remarks, I think.
Excellent. Yes. Let's go just to the next one. I think the next one we can actually skip, but there's one last one. So yeah, this one we can skip. This is really sort of more the question at the end of all the answers, right? What's next? What's the future? And of course it's more integration. There's always something else, as AR and VR goes its path and its evolutionary steps. There is probably more demand for new file formats and other types of integrations with this and many other things. Even just the integration between SYSTRAN and XTM still has a few things we want to do. For example, if you have a new term-based entry, have that automatically added to the UD in SYSTRAN, the user dictionary. That's actually possible already in terms of the API. It's just not fully implemented yet. So, but if you, for instance, if you develop your own code, your own app, your own system, and in that system you develop a dictionary, or you have some sort of a selection mechanism by which new terms are created, they can go via the API into the terminology dictionaries that SYSTRAN maintains. You may also, of course, want that validation, the validated segments to be used in retraining, a constant training. Internally at SYSTRAN, we have an infinite training system, and we have constantly hundreds of engines that are being retrained and specialized. And we will very soon release a first glimpse of that in what we call the marketplace. So you'll see that there is a growing amount of capabilities to be also exploited with the combination with XTM. And then, of course, the question now at this point is, what else do you want? What else do you need? There are a lot of things imaginable, and many times they are kind of common between different game developer or game engines, but there's also a lot of very special needs, and that's one of the things we definitely are looking forward to helping you with. Right, that would be it. Carolina, do you have any? Okay, open discussion at this time. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that in-depth technical dive. I will definitely be reviewing the video. I don't have any questions. Let's see. Does anybody in the audience has any questions for John and Philip? Seems not at
Yeah,
the
we
time.
covered the questions we had so far, but I know we've pretty much filled the hour. But if you want to type a question in real quick, we'll try to address it. You can always reach out to us via email and ask any additional questions.
Of course.
We're always happy to answer those.
And tomorrow we'll be sending out the recordings for webinar 1 and 2. And thank you so much for the time, Philip and John.
Thank you,
my
and I want
pleasure.
to
Always
thank
fun, guys.
Simon at Artform Games for allowing us to use his pictures.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Check out Artform Games; they're cool.
Perfect. Thank you so
well,
much.
I don't see any new questions coming in, so we'll wrap up for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
See you next time.
All right, bye
Bye.
for now. Happy gaming.